Okay, thank you. So, I'm not sure where our third panelist is, but hopefully she will be able to join us maybe in the middle. I think some people are having some tech issues, so hopefully she will be able to join us. But for now, we'll just get started. So before we really begin, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement, and that is, this year we are coming together across all of Canada and the world. We would like to acknowledge that our organization operates from both treaty lands and the unceded territories, of Indigenous peoples of multiple and distinct nations across Turtle Island. I am specifically situated in the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, also in which Toronto is covered by Treaty 13. And just really quick, I would like to share this resource with everyone in the chat, and that is, it's a wonderful website and map in which you can put it. Functions, I think, based on Google Maps, and enables you to put in your own address or wherever you're located, so that you can learn about the traditional territories that we are meeting on or situated on. And so I believe our third panelist has arrived. So I will move on to the presenter biography. So hello everyone. We are this panel, or this session, is on is called Superheroes Breaking the Mold. We have three wonderful panelists today sharing their research with us. Going just based on order on the schedule, Jeden Tolentino is currently pursuing an MA in history at York University. His research interests include American history and the history of feminism. He intends to pursue a PhD in cultural history and plans to use comic books, which he has been reading for almost 30 years, as one of his historical sources. Our second panelist is Taylor Greene, who is a PhD candidate at Carleton University. He studies political theory with a focus on the manifestation of technology in continental German idealist philosophy. He is from Thunder Bay, Ontario, and currently resides in Victoria, BC. He has been reading comic books for most of his life. Mouse and Crisis on Infinity Earths are among his two favorite books. And our last panelist for today is Rehab Patel, she is currently in the process of developing her MRP. She hopes to develop a digital diary narrating the intersectional identities of Muslim women in Toronto. Her aim is to examine how most fashion is often used as an umbrella term to define fashion identity of Muslim women, which excludes lived experiences of those within the spectrum of religiosity and non-religiosity. So thank you for joining us, everyone, today. I just wanted to ask the panelists, is there a preference for who would like to go first?
I could go first.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Jeden. And with that said, I will turn it over to Jeden so he may talk about his work. He did post it online. It is a blog post, so I will put your piece about Miss America Chavez in the chat right now. And yeah, please feel free to share with us your research. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. Hello, everybody. I'm physically in Winnipeg at the moment, so I acknowledge that I'm on ancestral lands and Treaty 1 territory. And it's also the heartland of the Métis people. The blog post that I shared with the CSSC, as Erica said, is about Miss America Chavez, and I think that my interest in this topic. Well, I originally wrote a paper for a queer of color critique class a couple of years ago. It was just me trying to figure out how to use comic books, which I read on a leisurely basis, and hopefully in the future I could use it for my academics to see whether it's something that I would be interested in actually using for my degree. And I noticed that America Chavez has become more and more visible in the Marvel universe as the years have gone by, and I think that soon she'll be part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well. I'm not sure if it's going to be directly in the movies or maybe it's going to be a Disney Plus series, but the point is that she's becoming one of those more visible characters, and especially with the inclusivity that the MCU is trying to get at. I think she's one of the perfect examples of who may be part of that trend. So one of our other panelists will talk about Miss Marvel today. So I guess she's part of that same umbrella. Yeah, it's something that I just wanted to experiment on, and since in the class that I spoke about on queer of Clark critique, we read a few works by Audre Lorde, so I just tried to see whether it fits the character, and I didn't want to go to Young Avengers or any of the more recent appearances of America Chavez. So I decided to go all the way back to her first appearance, and there has been a lot of changes in how the character is portrayed from her first appearance in the series Vengeance. Her costume has changed a lot, and also the way she interacts with other characters has also changed a lot. But if you go back to Vengeance, you will see some of the seeds of how she's currently portrayed and why she seems like a character that a lot of other writers have used as a sort of a vessel to get at marginalized identities within the Marvel universe, which is, whether we like it or not, is filled with characters that are mostly white, mostly male, and I guess she is one of the ways by which other identities can be explored. So I hope that you enjoyed my blog post, and it's really just me trying to get to each of the 6 issues and see where I could put Audre Lorde's words, or how I could interpret Audre Lorde's words in the series. So you'd notice that each of the images in the blog post is chronological in order. So you will see one is from issue 1 all the way to issue 6. So if you have a chance to read Vengeance, I hope that this would, I don't know, provide a little bit more context to this story.
All right, awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us, Jeden. I'll just go in order as listed on the schedule. Our second speaker for today's panel is Taylor Greene. His talk is titled Plato, Eros, and the Dark Knight, Examining Tom King's Character Reversal. So I will turn the floor over to Taylor.
Okay, thank you very much, Erica. I just have to share my screen here. Okay, can everyone see that? All right, so today I'm talking to you about primarily Tom King's run on Batman, the flagship title of DC Comics here, and what he did to reverse the origin of the character, so that previous iterations of Batman as Bruce Wayne are abolished, and Batman is starting anew in this kind of ambiguity, so that it leaves room for new character interpretations of the character. So this idea came to me while at another conference I saw this panel, Politics of Gotham. They were just exploring this new book. So it's a book on political theory specifically and the Batman universe. So I tried to extend some of the arguments in this book. So in particular, I'm looking to Drake and Lloyd's chapter in the book Batman, the Noble Dog, The Cost of Spiritedness. And what I'm trying to explain is to overthrow their notion that Batman is primarily spirited. And what Tom King is doing on his previous run on Batman is to throw in this new iteration of Batman where the Bruce Wayne character is completely abolished, and to look for new character interpretations of the character. So the authors of this point to Plato's Republic to say that Batman is primarily ruled by spiritedness and would fall into the guardian class. So why do I look at Tom King's run? Because in 2016, he was put in command of the Batman title with the new Rebirth initiative from DC Comics. So, and this ended abruptly in 2019, and King was not allowed to continue his run to the final 100th issue and closed at issue 85 and was abruptly replaced with James Tynion. So now Tom King is on this Batman and Catwoman to kind of keep exploring the relationship. So King early on in interview said that he wanted to write Batman as the Great Gatsby with similar endings to the famous novel. And he's currently hinting to a finale, but DC canceled the finale because of the implications of what it would mean for the character, and that's my opinion. But so responding to Drake and Lloyd, I looked at Tom King's run and say Batman, with what Tom King is doing by putting him to find happiness, is being ruled in a play of Thumos and Eros, sticking to the ancient conceptions just to simply combat the notion from Drake and Lloyd, who say that in Plato's Republic, Batman would definitely be part of the spiritedness class. And so if Batman is ruled by Eros, it fundamentally breaks the character in itself, and we are in need of new iterations of the character. So I call this a character reversal. If Batman does not have an objective code, I can never kill the Joker, I must avenge justice, then we're essentially coming to the end of Frank Miller's notion of Batman, started in the late 1980s. So what Drake and Lloyd claim is that Batman can never be ruled by Eros. It can never be sort of wisdom. It's always this Thumos, pronounced Thumos, I tried to put here. So with being ruled by love, Batman's oath sworn on the death of his parents to be committed to a code of justice could be nullified. And that's what I think King is doing. And this is the theme he investigates through the only 85 issues that we were given. So here's some just illustrations. This is Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, which I think is coming to an end with Tom King's run. And here is what DC is opening the door with, I think, because of implications of Tom King's run. We can have new iterations of the character with inclusivity in mind and these types of things. Also, DC put this DC Future State initiative where things are taking part in the future because I think of this Tom King mishap where they need to explain in the future and not presently what is going on. So the shakeup at DC Comics in September 2016, Tom King takes over for Scott Snyder. October 2019, King is fired from the Batman title by Dan DiDio, replaced by James Tynion. In February 2020, Warner Brothers fires longtime executive Dan DiDio over this 5G dispute of the direction of the DC universe. Tom King is on new titles, and January 2021, DC launches this future state with new characters. In an interview, Tom King stated that his whole 85-issue run has to deal with death, and especially Batman's death. So it's kind of a metaphor for the overall death of the Bruce Wayne character. Now, Batman has been killed before by Grant Morrison, but the Bruce Wayne character came back. Tom King, it is my opinion, is killing the Bruce Wayne iteration finally. If Batman finds a love interest and is ruled by Eros, I think that's a fundamental break of the oath, and the character doesn't make logical sense anymore. And this is kind of what I'm arguing in response to Drake and Lloyd. So this is just the kind of theory I used from Plato's Symposium to combat the notion of Batman being ruled by Thumos in the Republic. And this is what they state from the Republic. Batman chooses to remain a guardian of the city, but will do so outside the boundaries of political legitimacy. And poses a question derived from Batman's status as a defender of the city is whether he possesses a well-ordered soul, at least in the Platonic sense. Batman is arguably what Socrates refers to as an honor-loving individual, rather than a wisdom-loving individual. And I say that the reverse is actually true with what Tom King is doing. So what are the costs to Batman and the citizens of Gotham from a guard who refuses to govern? And ultimately, they say he sacrifices happiness. So what I believe Tom King is doing is reasserting happiness into the equation and no longer giving a Bruce Wayne interpretation of Batman. So this is more of what I try to do with supplanting Eros with the Thumos by looking to Plato's Symposium. And then I asserted the figure of Socrates can be an allusion to Batman, like we could transpose that onto this new Tom King Batman because of the role of citizenship. Socrates kind of operated with outside of the city. So what Tom King is doing is introducing a tragedy. Tom King writes graphic books about trauma, heroes dealing with trauma and crisis, modern psychological tale. Through tragedy, the depths of sorrow, King creates characters of loss. So my prediction is that if King was able to finish the run, it could have been a case of Romeo and Juliet. Batman and Catwoman could have both died because the two worlds cannot be. There can't be happiness and what we've come to know as the continuation of Frank Miller's Dark Knight. King is attempting to bring Bruce Wayne to a conclusion to end Batman. To do this, he makes Batman fall in love with Eros to be the highest principle. Philosophical friends based on affection, their shared investigation for serious investigation, conventional limitations can be placed. Just some secondary literature I looked into. So to kind of wrap this up, King is abolishing previous iterations of Bruce Wayne by essentially making it illogical for it to exist as a character, Bruce Wayne character. So Catwoman writes to Batman in issue 50, if I help the lonely boy with the lonely eyes, I kill that engine, I kill Batman, I kill the person who saves everyone. And I thought this was an allusion to the grand finale that we never actually got. So if Batman finds happiness, Bruce Wayne iteration of Batman character is no more, opens the door for other iterations of the character that do not need the backstory of parents dying and avenging death. The character can evolve. We're left with this kind of ambiguity for the taking. And so the creed no longer presupposes Batman, like what Batman is. And I think, Batman as a concept is open because we no longer have moral objectivity. He's no longer morally devoted to a cause. So with the introduction of Batman, Catwoman to conclude here, a series of love interest, King is giving us a Batman tragedy. The logic of Bruce Wayne Batman makes no more sense. Batman is no longer a figure of moral objectivity, and I'm investigating whether or not this breaks the traditional cast of the hero. Does this leave room for DC to provide new iterations of the character, especially for inclusivity, and move on from the Bruce Wayne model? Erotic Batman loving Catwoman would produce a death of the previous iterations, as I mentioned. In this sense, King is putting Eros in play with Thumos and the celebrated hero, making the Dark Knight Shakespearean rather than Homeric, towards an absolute virtue. The Shakespearean tragic is breaking the mold from previous casts, and it's up to DC the direction they take the character from here. And here's my references, and I just have a quote that kind of encapsulates what I'm trying to talk about from Nietzsche: that which is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil. So thank you very much, and I'll stop sharing.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that, Taylor. So now our last speaker, our last panelist for today is Rehab Patel, talking about Miss Marvel, examining intersectional identities of young Muslims through lived religion. So I'll turn the floor over to you, Rehab. All the best.
Thanks. Hello. I hope everyone can hear me. Can I screen share?
Brandon, can you give a co-host? Yep.
I got it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Hi guys. So as introduced, my name is Rehab Patel. I am a fashion master's student at Ryerson University, but don't worry, I don't research high fashion as everyone assumes it to be. I really look at it through a sociological perspective. I'm very excited to present today. It is my first conference paper, so I would love some feedback. Who knew teenage Rehab could have never dreamed of presenting on superhero? Like, come on, how awesome in an academic setting. So I'm so excited. Let me go ahead and just start with a little bit of overview on what I'm presenting on. So I'll start off with my framework definitions of intersectionality and lived religion, and who is Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel, and the intersectional identities, and then we'll kind of jump into the embodied practices. And of course, near the end, we'll focus on challenging Islamophobia and how that really relates to changing the narratives of popular media through either comics, the Marvel universe, as we all know, and what is the Miss Marvel era. So intersectionality, I'm basically using Patricia Hill Collins' theoretical framework on intersectionality, which focuses on how structural forms of power are intertwined with the experiences of the everyday. So the everyday is experienced by the average person through their multiple identities. So for example, I am, yes, one, a South Asian woman. I am also a woman. I am a visible Muslim woman, and these are just three aspects of my identity that really shape how I'm experiencing the everyday, which is really interesting because this framework to me is very crucial in how we see like the world, whether it's just comics, the way we look at politics, social life, everything. It really does dissect the fact that how systems of power marginalize people individually through their intersects of their multiple identities. So it's impossible that my experience as a woman is going to be collective to someone else who identifies as a woman. In contrast, I do want to look at the concept of lived religion through McGuire's framework as an embodied practice of religiosity and spirituality as divided entities experienced separately beyond institutionalized religion. So religion and spirituality, they're separate from organized religion through institutions and how it's really practiced by the average person. So moving on to who is Kamala Khan. She is a title superhero. She was the first Muslim Pakistani American superhero by Marvel Comics. She was created by Sana Amanat and G. Willow Wilson. Her abilities focus on shape-shifting, and she takes on the mantle of Captain Marvel. What makes her so popular and amazing to me is not only is her existence so humorous, but her experiences, they do reflect the average experience of a teenager in America. And as we mentioned with intersectionality, this concept of hybrid identity. So she is not just a regular teenager. Her intersecting identities is what makes her so unique, but very like comforting too. So her shape-shifting ability she does in the first issue take on of Captain Marvel, which we'll get into detail on why that's so interesting, of this young brown girl taking on her shape-shifting abilities to portray as a white blonde woman. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on my research on intersection identities and how that's very crucial in Miss Marvel's success. So what provides this authentic experience and narrative is, what does it mean to be quote unquote American? who is American in this sense, because Kamala Khan, she is Pakistani by her ethnic background. She is also Muslim by her religious identity, but now she is a superhero through her inhumanity powers to shape shift. And not only is she navigating who she is in this superhero verse, but at the same time, this aspect of maintaining a balance between, hey, I still have to listen to my parents, I just can't run around, does relate to the average teen. I know as a brown girl myself, it's just like, hey, this is mimicking what I've experienced, but you see it as like, I can daydream about being a superhero because, well, having abilities is basically all I need to be a superhero. My religion, my culture doesn't really indicate that. And overall, these intersecting identities do come into place in not only the public, but the private spheres. So in the public, she is not only a superhero, but she is just an average American girl, versus in the private, there are many instances where her family is more interactive with not only their religious identity, but her cultural identity as a Pakistani woman. So how does this separate her sense of belonging? Moving forward towards embodied practices, I really like this quote by McGuire is, what is embodied practices of lived religion? Well, lived religion is outside of organized religion. In the comics in Figure 1, as you notice, there's this situation where she goes to the mosque and she's challenging what the imam, the religious leader in the mosque, is saying. And she's not only, in a way, challenging what he's saying through a cultural narrative, but a religious narrative too. She seems educated in the part where, like, well, you're saying this, but I know Islam teaches it X, Y, and Z. So the quote where McGuire says, daily life is filled with routine practices, ways of doing tasks, of walking and sitting, of talking and gesturing, of showing emotions, and so on. The walking, the conversations, they're typically a practice ends, and practices themselves can over time affect physical, emotional, spiritual developments of individuals who engage with them. So in narrative is, she not only deviates from this institutionalized and organized religious identity of what it means to be Muslim, she does constantly remind herself that, yes, I am still Muslim. So in Figure 2, while she's debating helping her high school bully, she does quote, reflect back on the Quran, says, yes, if you save one of mankind, you save everyone, versus if you kill one, you kill all of mankind. And I thought that was very, very, it changed the perspective, especially in 2013, of how we view Muslims in the everyday. Figure 3 really just reflects on different types, because we see Kamala Khan as someone who does not wear the hijab, but in contrast, you see someone like her brother, who even her dad says, like, hey, you want to get a job, God's not going to come and hand you a job in your hand, you're going to need to get out into the world. So it does really contrast on how lived religion is practiced individually by everyone. So challenging Islamophobia. So young Muslims, their identity is not only experienced through religion, but through this, I would say, like, paradox of religion, politics, and culture, because one, their existence is politicized from deviating from the Western narrative of what it means to be American, in my sense, what it means to be Canadian. Where does this identity politics really come into place? So her existence really, like, just creating a Muslim Pakistani superhero in such a large medium that now is being presented in live action, which is super exciting. It really does actively reflect, like, our sociopolitical realm of what is accepted and what isn't, and how do we challenge this. So just the physicality of Miss Marvel taking on the mantle of once a white, blonde, blue-eyed superhero into a brown teenager who actively reflects on her Muslim identity in a way identically does challenge Islamophobia. However, it's really interesting how this also neutralizes the idea of Muslimhood, because who is a Muslim? As we saw in the screen cap before, her brother does really reflect what, in a way, media portrays Muslims as. Like, there is a realm of religiosity and non-religiosity, but just by looking at someone, you can't really say, hey, I know this person is super religious. Why? Just because they have a beard, just because they have a hijab, all of a sudden they are a symbol representation. And we see that in popular media. So it defies the stereotype of Muslim womanhood just based off of visibility by providing this contrast. And then, what is the Miss Marvel era? It starts with navigating belonging, just the conversation of who belongs where. And beyond the medium of just graphic novels, it does translate into not only like live action, but actively uplifting Muslim and brown voices in creating these authentic experiences instead of just immediately like profiting off of, you know, these stories. These stories are not only inspiring, but they are the reality of so many people, especially when they're othered in both public spaces and private spaces, because, well, it's like, wait, I'm American, but I'm also Pakistani. How does that translate into my everyday? And that's pretty much what we really did analyze on. And honestly, my favorite part and what I'm inspired about is changing the narrative of the racialized body being saved. This time, metaphorically, this brown girl, instead of saving, instead of being saved, is the one saving. And that's pretty much it. Miss Marvel is about breaking narratives of the racialized body. This new era of comic heroes is inspiring. I'm 24 and I'm inspired by this comic of a teenage brown Muslim superhero. So we can all be superheroes in our own little way. And that's it for me.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Rehab. I'm just going to take advantage of moderator privileges and just say, like, the very first time I ever presented at CSSC, my paper was also on Miss Marvel. So this is quite the flashback. But all right, everyone. Thank you to our three panelists for presenting. I think there are some commonalities in the comics and the topics you've all chosen to speak on today. But I just, because we have quite a bit of time, I wanted to just touch in with the audience and open up the floor and ask this, if anyone has questions they would like to ask our panelists, because I already used my moderator privileges to make a comment. So I see one hand. Andrew, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you to all the panelists. That was a lot of fun. My question is going to be for Taylor, because Taylor's from Thunder Bay and I'm from Thunder Bay. So shout out to the Hoito. So I really liked your engagement with Tom King's Batman. I think it's certainly an inversion from type that I think is really worth talking about for such a fundamental superhero. I'm not as far as you are in the reading. I think I got to like Nightmare and kind of stopped. My argument that I've made before that is incorrect, but I would love to get your opinion on, is that he doesn't really break Batman. He starts with Batman already broken. And that all of the thymos that you were talking about, that's actually Catwoman. Catwoman drives the narrative. She's the one who chooses the whole wedding scenario by which Gotham is protected. She functions as the guardian. She's also the only interesting character, which is probably why I jumped off once the marriage thing happened. As I said, I can't prove this theory. I don't think it's a valid theory, but in light of what you've said, I would really like to hear your perspective on that and why I'm wrong.
No, I don't necessarily think you're wrong. I think there's room for both, and I chose focusing on the Batman character when there's a lot to say on Catwoman and this whole thing as well. But specifically for this purpose, because I saw this character reversal, and just from reading interviews and what went on at DC, like, why did this happen and why was Tom King kicked off? And I was trying to go in this aspect, but Catwoman is just as much, Catwoman is driving the narrative in this. And I think, you know, it's much more enjoyable to read in this whole, I don't even think I like the run that much. It's just, it just remains really ambiguous for me. And Joelle Jones I've read a lot of Catwoman by Joelle Jones, is fantastic. And yeah, otherwise, I don't, it could be the thematic one is primarily Catwoman and maybe more autonomy, like it was driving more autonomy to Catwoman with the break off of the wedding in issue 50. But yeah, I am just unsure with Tom King's intention, and my only explanation was that he's trying to ultimately, yes, he starts with Batman being broken, but I think the fact that he's attempting to do something like The Great Gatsby, wants to kill Bruce Wayne iteration forever and move on. Let's move on with Batman. And that was my explanation, which I've tried to share today. But hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, awesome. So we have quite a few people have their hands, but I believe Anna is next because she put it in the chat. But I think Anna has a question for Taylor as well.
Yes, sorry. It's sort of related to the same. Being super sex is one of my areas of study, I can't help but ask you whether you had thoughts about sort of the sexual taboo regarding Batman more generally, specifically involving the Batman's penis controversy from 2018 and sort of a lot of the anxieties that that raised, and how those kind of go back to Frederick Wortham's claims about Batman and Robin and the homophobia involved there. This character in particular seems to be really bound up with like sexual shame and denial. And I was just wondering if you had any sort of thoughts about how that relates to sort of that larger gender and sexual context of the character. And I will leave it there.
Wow, very interesting. And yeah, the whole penis incident with Batman, I remember being at the comic book store and they were actively taking them off the shelves. I think it was the Black Label, like they were actually taking these off the shelves for being too explicit or something, which is very interesting. And there's definitely a sexual taboo surrounding Batman that I think Tom King, so I don't want to read too much into Tom King's genius and whether I don't think he is maybe a genius in some things, but I think he was trying to break that whole mode. I think he was trying to break the whole sexual taboo, all constructions of Batman, and to open it up to future creators to mold the character into whatever form they think. It's really interesting. I got into the Rorschach that Tom King is writing right now, and he actually puts Frank Miller in the comic. And so if you get a chance to read this, it's very interesting and very kind of cryptic by Tom King, but there's all these shots that have Dan DiDio and I think the upper echelons of DC and stuff like this. But I'm just, what confused me the most is what happened to, like, why was he kicked off Batman? Like, what was he trying to finalize, or, you know, and if it is illogical for Batman to exist as this certain norm that we believe Batman to be, like, if you give him happiness and a love interest and he's ruled by Eros, which I just tried to tie to what Drake and Lloyd were saying to try to combat that notion. But, you know, I think it just breaks the character. I don't think it logically we can have a Bruce Wayne Batman if he were to follow through with that. So that was just, I think, but as the sexual things for sure. And I think there's a whole opening now for new iterations, like just a bunch of newness with the character that's been tied to the same kind of Bruce Wayne since 1939 or something. So
Can I just mention like a brief follow-up thing? I just like wonder whether the nature of Batman's sexuality sort of matters to some of these discussions in terms of something like Kevin Smith's Wyden and Geyer, in which Batman's like masculinity and sexuality is very stereotypical in like a porn way, didn't produce any anxiety, whereas something like Tom King, where Batman's getting married and becoming domesticated, does produce anxiety. Just a final comment and I'll be quiet.
Thanks for that, Anna. Taylor, is there anything you would like to add in response, or?
Yeah, it's been a long time since I think I have read Wyden and Geyer. I think he did two Kevin Smith or something, but the whole construction of Batman, like personally, I think it's time, and I'm a Batman fan, but I personally think it's time to just blow up all the constructions and normativity surrounding it. It's just, and they've been trying for a while with Batwoman and a lot of these different characters surrounding him, but they seem to be satellite compared to the Bruce Wayne image. And I'm just wondering, and I think a lot of the room for new norms surrounding sexuality in Batman can be, you know, discovered with this new ambiguity that we're playing with. But DC kicked off Tom King, so I'm kind of, I don't know what's the future for DC. So.
Okay. Thanks for the response, Taylor. So I believe William had his hand up first, and then Elizabeth will go next.
So thank you very much, Erica, for moderating this session, and thank you to our presenters for their wonderful work. My question is specifically for Jeden and Rehab. I was reminded during your presentations of the aspects of not just intersectionality that Rehab was pointing out, but of identity just at its most basic level, the idea of the normate and the other. And I thought it was quite, it was thought-provoking that both Miss America and this new iteration of Miss Marvel take on these roles of previously marginalized identity, still marginalized identity in a very broad way. And I was wondering, I don't know much about Miss America, but I do know that Miss Marvel wasn't she originally conceptualized as being from another planet?
Yeah, so I think originally the plan was to have the same background as Captain Marvel, but when Sana Amana was talking about it, she said they focused more on making it more like the average person and connecting that to what it means to be like in a quote unquote savior, especially when it comes to like our personhood. So I know she reflected on like how she was talking about, oh, I was telling my stories about like, you know, my South Asian household, and everyone thought that was so funny. And I think that's what really shifted this idea of what it means to be superheroes. Like you don't need to be someone outside from a different planet, which like you mentioned, of being othered, where marginalized communities naturally are othered, where it's like, well, we're aliens and being alienated. So I think it really does contradict and start pushing it where these words are more than just metaphors, but they're actively the same. I hope that kind of clarifies.
You jumped, I was having such a poor time articulating my question, but you really got to it on your own, this question of what is it to be among the norm, among the aggrandized, what is it to be among quote unquote the alien? Because we see this in comics, these representation of these otherworldly figures, which are aliens, and as far as we conceive of them as Martians. But today, even today in the rhetoric of my home country of America, there's a lot of talk about it's the other is conceptualized totally out there as alien. I'm sorry, I'm failing to articulate this well, but it seems such a striking aspect of the identity of superheroes, all the way back to like Superman, where he was conceptualized as otherworld. And I'm wondering if Miss America kind of fits into that, because this.
I think that Miss America was given this Latina identity, but then she's coming from another dimension, so sort of an alternate Earth. So I guess she's also alien, doubly alien, I guess, because she's coming from another dimension, and she's not white. she's coming from a Latina origin. So, and interestingly, that doesn't the other dimension stuff doesn't come up in Vengeance. It comes up in further adventures of hers. So so it's really something that other writers have added. Unlike, let's say, Superman, where it's part of the original conception of the character.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for accommodating my graceless question. But your presentations were all very enjoyable, so thank you so much for your work.
Thank you for your question and your engagement, William. So I believe Elizabeth was next with a question for our panelists.
Yeah, first I just want to say you all did so great. So that was awesome. I loved hearing all of your presentations. Actually, my question was for you, Rehab. One thing you mentioned about was that scene where Kamala, when she first changes into Ms. Marvel, and she's in the, you know, sort of white body, right? And sort of breaking out of that, right? And I, you know, sort of that connection with, you know, breaking out of, right, this narrow box of whiteness. So yeah, like that was so great. I just wanted to know your thoughts. What did you think of her costume? And also, you said you were a fashion student, so her costume, and also, of course, I don't know if you've seen the MCU version of her costume too. Yeah.
I was thinking about adding that scene in where she's looking for the burkini and she's like, Mom, where's my burkini? And I just thought that was so humorous because, like, even now we see, like, around the world how the burkini is so stigmatized around, like, the concept of just being covered. And her mom was like, hey, you said you'd never wear it. She's like, yeah, I said I'm never gonna wear it swimming, but when I go to a party. So, like, I just loved how an average piece of clothing for, you know, the average Muslim girl who's practicing was like, well, I want to be covered. That was, like, very instinctive to her, where it's like, well, I have this outfit which covers everything, but it gives me flexibility. Well, for me, it's like, well, I have to think about what I'm wearing a few times. It's like, well, does this cover, does this look quote unquote modest for me? In comparison to, like, the behind the scenes photos of what's happening in the MCU with Iman Vellani, I think it looks so cute. It really does reflect, like, I would say girlhood, because it not only reminds you of a dress, but it doesn't look overly, like, sexualized. And that's what we really do notice in, like, femininity and superheroes, where these costumes, even when they're transforming, they are automatically super body fitted. Versus for her, well, she chose something that was not only comfortable to her, but was available. I really like it. I think I'm like, I don't know if that would suit me if I was Kamala Khan, but, you know, it feels good. It looks really nice, I would say.
Yeah, I love her, and I love her costumes. So thank you for this.
We have some time, so I'm going to play the moderator card one more time and ask, it's sort of a question for all three panelists, because I noticed a common thread in each of your presentations about, like, looking into the future in direction of where superhero comics are, like, I guess a certain portion of superhero comics are going towards, and that is expanding beyond their conventional they're more conventional understanding. Even for Batman, there is this, I think with Batman, what we're seeing is, like, this not internal, but a conflict about, like, how this character is supposed to change heading into the future, especially in a time where increasingly where a lot more superhero comics like America Chavez and Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, is, you know, they're tapping into issues about, like, identity and representation and, like, the overlapping complexities of of identity. So I just wanted to ask our three panelists, what are your thoughts about like superhero comics as we go forward? Because we can always say it's 2016 or it's 2021, but change has its own ebb and flow. So yeah, it's just feel free for anyone who wishes to respond.
I think I'm reminded of the time, I think 2015 or 16, when all of Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor weren't the three white men. Like Iron Man became Riri Williams, and then Thor became Jane Foster, and Captain America became Sam Wilson. So I think that, but there was an unfortunate part of the consumption of those comics, in terms of why it was connected to lowered sales, I guess. So it was the transformations were being blamed on the economic imperative for Marvel Comics. So I think that hopefully that taught them a lesson in terms of who their audience is and how to implement that sort of change, for better or for worse. But I think it's always cyclical. We would maybe expect more of this from the movies than in the comics, because they're not completely the same audience. There's a lot of overlap, of course, but there's some difference. But yeah, for me, it's always cyclical. And I'm seeing Anna's comments about, yes, other examples, Wolverine as Laura Kinney and Amadeus Cho's Hulk. So yeah, I guess that from the long time that I've been reading comics, there's a lot of cyclical changes that have gone on.
Yeah, I've sort of my current observations are like the movie and TV franchises are kind of catching up with time, so to speak. And I feel like that I'm hesitant to give credit to like Marvel being like they've suddenly become very socially conscious, and they're gonna like change their direction and editorial decisions about where each of those franchises will go. But it is certainly interesting because like DC Comics just last month released a mini anthology to mark Asian Heritage Month, and in that story, as part of that, they have now, I guess, their version of the Monkey King, which is from like Chinese folklore and mythology. And so I'm just like, okay, there's so much to unpack there. But yeah, I don't know, Taylor or Rehab, do either of you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
I'll go ahead. I think so I remember growing up where my sister and my brother, they were DC fanatics, right? Like I grew up with Batman, Superman, but in a way it was never relatable to me either, even as like a young girl, because like you'd see Catwoman, someone who, again, there was a lot of not only whiteness, but there was like this hyper-representation of femininity, which is just like, well, as a young girl too, like, hey, like my body does not look like that. It will never look like that. And I think what's really touched upon now is catching up with the times, but again, it's neutralizing the average person, where the superhero is not a complete alien, not somebody that is not attainable, but rather it's more on what makes this one person so unique into their presentation to the world, right? Like even with Miles Morales, that you see that he took on the mantle of Spider-Man, and it's just like it blew up because like this new generation of comic readers or someone who's newly into comics are really like, well, this is feasible, this is attainable in a way that does not seem completely fictional, but it does, I would say, like clash with reality. And we're seeing that in graphic novels too, other than just changing the race and the ethnicity of someone when it comes to live screen, but the actual mediums that they're being presented on, it seems attainable. And I love the direction that it's going on by uplifting these authentic experiences and voices.
Yeah, I was recently reading something in which Gene Yang was talking about how when he was growing up, he was reading superhero comics, but a lot of the work was like cross-identification. Like you find ways to relate to Batman or Superman somehow, some way, because of that element of universality. But yeah, it's interesting to say the least. But I believe I saw there was some shuffling between you and Taylor, so I think I'll give some time for Taylor to give his response.
No worries. Yeah, I would just actually concur and kind of continue the conversation by relating it back to DC. And it seems like DC is at times like this stagnant engine. And I go to, I'll buy a DC comic and it just often reminds me of like just pure capitalism or something. Like I'm just, sometimes there are a lot of like filler and stuff. And I often have found being a fan that it is this resistance to change and things. And, and maybe it is a good start to the firing of Dan DiDio I saw like in the comments here. It's just like, maybe it is this kind of structure or institution that was in place. But Marvel, I think, is taking the lead on a lot of social progress issues, and I think DC has to follow suit to meet the demand of comic readership. It's just talking about DC because that's what I presented on, and or maybe it's a rise of new independent things, but the duopoly on the industry by the two industry giants is kind of, especially in DC, it's just so slow moving at times. But what you say, celebrating Asian Americans and things like this is step in the right direction, and we'll see if they bring in new creative authors and young talent and things like this to offset some of this slow stagnant engine. So yeah, I guess we'll have to see. I don't know why. Maybe just DC as a company likes to try to stick to heritage and things, and I'd like to kind of like see less of this. Like why do we still have Bruce Wayne? Bruce Wayne was killed by Grant Morrison. They have this long arc to like bring him back through time and things. I never really understood this. So yeah.
So thank you for that response, Taylor. We have like 3 more minutes, and so Brandon, I just got your message. I don't know if you've already sent it or not. Do you want to ask something?
No, I'm going to ask Taylor afterwards. It's a question that nobody else could possibly be interested in the answer to. So I'll ask him after the panel.
Okay, yeah, this is probably a good place to plug the Discord as a chance to connect and to discuss with one another if you feel like an audience will not be interested in it. But we have a couple of minutes, and so I just wanted to ask panelists to give panelists a chance if you have any questions for each other. If not, then I guess we can end literally 2 minutes early. So I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for coming to today's panel. I'm excited. This was really fun and awesome. When I saw the schedule, I was like, yes, I will volunteer for this, even though I don't know how to moderate. But thank you, everyone, for coming to today's session. Thank you, panelists, for your wonderful presentations. It was so wonderful to see and hear your wonderful work. And I hope to see everyone else in the other sessions, or even tomorrow. Please come tomorrow. All right.
Thank you.
No problem. Congrats, everyone. Great job.
Hey, Taylor, do you have 2 minutes?
Hey, Brandon. Yes. Yeah.
Thanks. I thought your paper was great. I actually want to follow up on the Shakespeare references you make at the end of it. I was curious if that stuff if it's just coming from you, or if it's coming actually from the comics, because like Grant Morrison was kind of Shakespeare obsessed in his Batman run, like comes back to it over and over and over again. So I was curious if King is kind of picking up on that again. Morrison goes to Hamlet, like his thing is Batman is like Hamlet. So I'm curious, when you brought up Romeo and Juliet, I was like, oh, I wonder if that's like a new approach King is taking, or if you're just kind of using it as a kind of an analogy for the different kind of hero he's trying to make.
Yeah, it was more of an analogy, but at the same time, through reading a lot of King's interviews and things, like he was obsessed with trying to make Batman like The Great Gatsby. So I was trying to read into this also, like maybe like some Romeo and Juliet or something, because I think he was setting up to just kill Bruce Wayne. Like he was just trying to set this up to kill us. And it's interesting. Grant Morrison didn't have the build up, so it was kind of like Hamlet. Like Batman just kind of dies, just in almost like a random battle. He kind of dies, and kind of similar maybe like Hamlet, but for King, it's the slow build of just like building that I thought maybe analogous to Romeo and Juliet. When I said, and not Homeric, because a lot of the time it was this Batman as absolute value will always win the day kind of thing. And and if it's a Shakespearean tragedy, and I think King is familiar with this. He's very, very like esoteric in his authorities. Like he's not out front with it, and he received a lot of criticism and stuff. And I don't know why. He's very, very vilified, especially for his Batman run. Maybe because the audience or the demand wants a traditional Bruce Wayne Batman. I don't know.
It's really interesting. It's I love that, just kind of that approach of trying to think about